I'll wait for you guys to hit record.
Okay, there it goes.
I just heard it. All right. So my nose a little bit muffled in there in terms of the recording. And I think we need this centering as much as anything. And so as we talk about kind of where native plants fit into the mode of modern life, I do want to always bring back the point that for the things that give us peace and wholeness, one of the things are nature sounds. And without the plants that undergird and support all these wonderful native pollinators and grasshoppers and birds and things that kind of give us this sense of peace, it is hard to see a place where that happens. So that's one of the reasons we need indigenous plants today. I'm going to just start real quickly by doing a land acknowledgement. This map, if you have not seen it, is really great. It kind of gives you an idea of where indigenous folks were before colonization. And I'm going to read this land acknowledgement, not because it corrects any of the things of the past, but it will go along with the talk, and I think it's important to do. All right, so before I begin my presentation, I need to recognize that indigenous peoples have been an irreplaceable presence of this place, Houston, Texas, for over 10,000 years, are still very much here today, and will be here tomorrow. I acknowledge that I'm on the ancestral lands of the Karankawa, the Beedai, the Coco, the Atakapa, and other native peoples of what is now known as Southeast Texas. I'm also mindful that the foundations of this place were built by the labor of many folks that preceded us, including enslaved peoples and pioneers, and we remember them today. Lastly, I remember that we share this place with over 10,000 species of indigenous plants and wildlife, and they too are members of our interconnected living communities and deserve their space and place too. So if you want to, I'll drop this in the chat later on if you want to kind of explore where the native folks were. But part of the reason I do this is to remind all of us that as we work with native plants or indigenous plants, that in many ways, as we plant them, it's a remembrance of those who came before us. And that's very meaningful for me. So I am Jaime González. I'm from the Nature Conservancy in Texas. We are a worldwide international conservation group. We work in over 70 countries. We work in all 50 states. We've had a chapter here in Texas, or have been doing work here in Texas since the 1960s. And much of the work that you will see that we are noted for are things like this. This is one of my favorite places. This is actually the Honey Creek wildlife area out near in the hill country. And it is just this beautiful, if you look at this, just this gorgeous creek here. And the thing about the Nature Conservancy in Texas is that we have been known as the Nature Conservancy more broadly for saving these super iconic spaces. In fact, we're coming up on one of the big milestones ever for us, which is 1 million acres protected in the state of Texas. So that is 53 out of every 100 acres in the state that have been protected, we have protected them. And so we are a land trust, much like the Coastal Prairie Conservancy or the Bayou Conservancy, Galveston Bay Foundation. We do work across the state. And so that is what we did for a very long time. We conserved land, and that was the bulk of what we did. Now, we're still very much protecting lands, including a part of Honey Creek. And what you'll notice is that oftentimes what we do is we save land, and then we get it into the hands of somebody else, like the federal government or someone else. Sometimes we conserve it, but if you go across the state, there are many, many sites. All these sites are places that we help to protect. So if you like Enchanted Rock or, Guadalupe Island National Wildlife Refuge, Big Bend State Park, Big Bend National Wildlife Refuge, Balcones, we've had a hand in protecting all these places. And here locally, we have protected places like this. This is the Nash Prairie Preserve. So if you've never been out there, it's just really, really stunning. And we've protected enough land in the greater Houston area that you could fit the city of Philadelphia on it. That's how much land we've saved. But here's the thing that has happened since we purchased our first property, which is now part of the Atwater Prairie Chicken National Wildlife Refuge. The world has changed significantly. And the field of conservation has changed significantly along with it. And frankly, since I got my start at the Houston Arboretum Nature Center in 1998, my views and my work has evolved alongside of it. So part of what I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to try to give you an understanding of kind of where the field might be heading, where indigenous plants are going to be really powerful, and hopefully kind of an idea of where dedicated groups and individuals like the Native Plant Society of Texas and the Houston chapter will play a shining role. So before I really get into this, I do need to really thank NIPSOT and NIPSOT Houston chapter for being that lighthouse for all these decades, because I think we're primed to do something much bigger than we ever thought we could in the next 10 years. I think that we're going to go to places that we didn't think are possible. And it's going to be because there was a native plant movement. Without that native plant movement, we wouldn't be situated to take off like a rocket the way that I think we're going to do that. I'm also going to give you an idea of how conservation is intersecting with social justice, climate justice, and how it's kind of transforming the way we think about the field of conservation as well. So let me just quickly tell you a little bit about my background. I started my career at the Houston Arboretum Nature Center, was there for about 7 years, and then moved on to what is now called the Coastal Prairie Conservancy. Used to be called the Katy Prairie Conservancy when I was there. I worked there for about 11 and a half years. And after Hurricane Harvey happened back in 2017, 5 years ago now, I was recruited by the Nature Conservancy to be the inaugural Houston Resilient Cities Director. And so my job really is, my day job is to use all the skills that I've ever learned and learning a lot more to try to find out where the power of nature can be used with communities and in co-creation with communities to get to any number of needs. And it could be biodiversity, it could be equity, it could be justice, it could be health. But usually it's all of those things because nature is extremely powerful, right? So as I look at how I see things now, I'm going to tell you just a couple things. One is I think regionally in terms of my work. So Houston is a plain. It's not divided by mountains or anything like that. So whatever happens in the city is partially going to be determined by what happens on the peripheries. Are we developing upstream and putting concrete everywhere? Are we allowing nature to protect us on the coastline from hurricanes and other things as much as it can? And everything in between. What we're looking at is a tapestry of ecosystems, not a city ecosystem and a country ecosystem, but an interwoven grouping of ecosystems, all which have human influence and impact. And so really, as we think about this next stage of what we do with native plants, what we do with conservation, just keeping in mind that this is a unit right here is going to be super, super important. And where you are on that unit in this tapestry of ecosystems is going to help to determine what helps. So one of the things that I am very interested in is rethinking what we mean when we say community. This is what I mean when I say community. For too long, we've only thought about kind of the human impacts of health and other dimensions. We haven't always thought about what are all these indigenous species that have been here for 10,000s of years, and what is their stakeholdership? What is our obligation to them in terms of their propagation, in terms of their continuance and their sustainability? So a lot of my work now is really focused on the health of this community. So as we work native plants back into the fabric of the city and the region, making sure that we're attending to all the human needs and all the biodiversity needs simultaneously as we can is really, really critical. And it's critical for a number of reasons. One is these are intersected. So people cannot really be healthy unless their environment is healthy, unless their ecosystems are healthy. We know that. But on the other hand, if we don't attend to the people, we don't have constituency for the rest of nature. But we also neglect the fact that as human beings, we have a fundamental right to nature. no matter where you are, no matter what neighborhood you're in, you have a fundamental right for biodiversity, and biodiversity can help you stay healthy as well. So, when I got into conservation, it was primarily, ecological in nature, right? So I was really taught to really be concerned about the plants and the animals in the ecological communities. The people part, not so much. We didn't really pay attention to the people part very much, frankly, unless we were teaching them about ecology or trying to engage them to be volunteers. But that's really radically changed for me because of what I've seen on the ground. So in many ways, what I do now is I work in what's called a One Health and Wellbeing model. And what that means is that is human health and well-being in all of its dimensions, environmental health, and the health of animals and biodiversity are all intersected. So whenever I do work nowadays, I never do a project just for biodiversity, and I never do a project just for people. I do it for the whole shooting match. And so when we are selecting plant species, we're thinking about how is that going to impact the biodiversity. When we're looking at working with communities in terms of what interventions to put in, we have to be advocating for the biodiversity itself and having a seat literally at the table. So we'll talk about a process that we did there. And in terms of that One Health, we are thinking about doing a summit next June, where we would bring in public health folks, we'd bring in conservation folks, we'd bring in social justice folks, we would bring in urban planners, we would bring in a lot of different disciplines to say, what does health do for the region? How do we all need to be working together to do this? So with that, I'm going to tell you about a couple of really, really awesome things that have happened in the last week. And one thing that should give us all pause before I give you some examples of what we're doing on the ground. The first thing I think that we need to be aware of is that there were two things that recently passed that are going to have a massive bearing on what we can do with indigenous or native plants. One is this: the Inflation Reduction Act that was just signed by President Biden is going to have a massive, much bigger than anything we've seen in our lifetime, opportunity for us to forward the work of conserving and enjoying and embedding nature and indigenous species back into communities. I don't know if you've seen the legislation, but we're going to be pouring tens of billions of dollars into climate action. That climate action ranges from everything from green energy production to helping farmers and ranchers sequester more carbon on their land, to large acquisition of nature as a carbon buffer. And about $60 billion will go to remediate environmental injustice. So wherever people are suffering from polluted air, polluted water, polluted soil, not enough trees to combat urban heat, they're disproportionately flooded because they don't have enough nature and other things to keep it in check. $60 billion is the game changer for many of us. And so one of my hopes that comes out of all of this funding is that we can have a coordinated effort here regionally to get some plant material centers together so that we can grow the millions of plants that we need to keep people safer and healthier using nature and to safeguard the beautiful biodiversity that we have here. So this is going to be the game changer. But in addition to that, the House just passed, we're waiting for the Senate to take this up, something called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. The Recovering America's Wildlife Act, if it's passed in the Senate, would mean that the state of Texas would get an additional about $60 million per year for biodiversity conservation every year, year in, year out. That's bigger than the current budget of Texas Parks and Wildlife. And that's just for biodiversity. It's not for, park amenities, which are super important and all those kinds of things. So what we're going to see is this massive influx of money that is going to come in the next 5 years, something several magnitudes larger. And we need it. We need it because we have lots and lots of issues to attend to. So here's one of the big ones: urban heat. So this study just came out. I was in a Washington Post thing this week, article, and it's because this survey just came out. If you take a look at this, this is just flat out frightening in terms of how hot this area can get. We're going to go from about, right now we have about 10 days of feels like temperature of 105. We're going to go to 74 days by mid-century. So what that's going to do is really challenge the sustainability and livability of this place. It's going to cause unbelievable challenges for the biodiversity as well. So the faster that we can get into the process of planting the millions of trees, the stormwater wetlands, the urban prairies, and the other natural features that can help to protect and mitigate against these onslaughts of heat and water, the better we have a chance of making a city that counts. So what I tell people is, why do we need indigenous plants? Well, indigenous or native plants are going to be the difference between a livable city and one where people are just moving out in droves because they can no longer take the punishing environmental conditions. So our choices are, in my mind, and it's a little bit binary, make a garden city or suffer the consequences of not planning ahead. So as we look at Houston, we have heat issues, we have flooding issues, but we also have to remember that we have sociological issues that have put many communities at risk. So certain communities have been disinvested for a long time, and therefore they don't have very great tree canopy cover. Some have been unfortunately pushed into places like floodways, particularly neighborhoods like Kashmir Gardens. Most of that is in the 100-year floodplain. Some communities are next to pollution centers, which puts them at higher risk for asthma and cancer and a whole bunch of things. And some, communities have been subjected to systemic racism for a long time. This is a map that a lot of Houstonians have never seen. This is a red line map. This is from the 1930s. And basically what it is it's really a map of where the federal government really spurred investment and disinvested other places. So the red line communities, those red areas, are predominantly African-American. And if you look at the sociological outcomes of that, those are still very much in play. But if you also look at the biodiversity outcomes of that, you can also see that in play, because whenever you disinvest a neighborhood for whatever reason, you are disinvesting green infrastructure that also supports biodiversity. So there's a research project that came out here recently, a research paper that looked at the effects of systemic racism on biodiversity. So that One Health concept that I was talking about really is taking into account both the biological needs that we have and also the sociological needs that we have. If you look at this life expectancy in Harris County, you can see that there is about a 17-year difference in life expectancy in the county. Now, all that's not environmental, but it certainly doesn't help that some communities don't have as rich nature to help protect them and do all the many things that they need to get done to clean the air, to clean the water, to protect them from heat, to give them things that are wonderful like bird sounds and things like that. So as we think about where to place indigenous plants, let's just remember that the power of nature is strong to protect our bodies and our minds and our spirits. But where you place that nature makes a huge amount of difference. Some communities are way hotter than others. Some communities are way more floodable than others, and some communities are suffering from air and water pollution more than others. So strategically placing indigenous plants is important. So one thing I will just say momentarily is there is and has been a huge movement underfoot. Many of you guys have been right there on the front lines of using native plants to address health issues, either for humans or biodiversity or both. And what we call these nature-based solutions. So here are some examples of some nature-based solutions. I got this from a group up in Chicago, but basically it can include things like green roofs. It can include things like residential yards and preserves and woodlands and utility corridors. We'll talk about that. Urban park space, green systems along rivers to clean the water before it gets discharged. So the bad thing about Houston is that we have a lot of wasted space. That's the bad part. The good part is every single one of these interventions that you can see can be deployed at scale through the city to get to better outcomes for both people and the rest of nature. And that's because, like I said, this is what we have throughout the city. As I drive around the city, I'm sure you do this too. What you're going to see is a whole bunch of blank pallets basically waiting to get filled in and used a lot better. We have tens and tens, I don't even know what the actual measurement is. We're thinking about measuring it, but we have more lawn than you can shake a stick at. Let's put it that way, in a very Texas kind of way. It may be, we think, is some of me, my colleagues and I talk, it may be the largest land type in the county, mowed lawns. Now, I don't think I have to remind you that lawns are actually dead zones that look like they're green. So there was a research study that looked at junkyards and looked at lawns to look at what had a higher biodiversity. Junkyards, by far, have a higher biodiversity than lawns. Then when you mix in all the toxic chemicals that sometimes people use on their lawns, and it goes into streams and have those adverse effects, the research has shown that many of these lawns soak up less than an inch, half an inch of rain before it runs off and becomes your neighbor's problem. And as I've done measurements of heat around the city, many of these lawns approach 100 degrees in the summertime. So they're also very hot surfaces. Even though they look green, they can be very compacted and very hard, and they don't absorb much water, and they're hot. And lastly, they take an incredible amount of resources to upkeep. So millions of dollars to mow. And they also cause lots and lots of air pollution in a city that can't really afford that because we've never really met our air quality conditions. I tell people that if you look at the research, mowing a yard or mowing a grassland for an hour is about the equivalent of driving a truck for 500 miles in terms of the emissions. Super, super dirty. And we're spewing all of this in the air because we're locked into an old way of looking at landscapes. We think that this is what's being a good neighbor. That's what we've been told. But if you're polluting the air and polluting the water, and you're not soaking up your neighbor's water, and you're making your neighborhood hotter, you really have to question that idea that this is being a good neighbor, right? Fortunately, as you know, we have the source code. We have these ecotypes that we can draw from in order to reconfigure them in different sorts of ways for different contexts in the city, and to create this garden-like city that lives and breathes and is healthier for all involved. Each situation is different. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of where we're working, and then I'm gonna close it up for questions. Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and show you a clip that just dropped this week on KPRC about how nature can help with some of the issues that we have. So just sit back. It's not a long clip. It's going to show you this clip.
Buildings, roads, neighborhoods. What once was rural farmland 80 years ago is now part of the sprawling, ever-expanding Houston community. Add on summer months that push the mercury into triple digits, and you've got a very large island of heat.
These surfaces like roadways and concrete pathways and things, they not only hold on to the heat during the day, but then they release it at night. Since 1970, the city has warmed up the average nighttime temperatures by over 5 degrees.
That's Jaime González from the Nature Conservancy, an international group that's targeted Houston as one of 21 cities that they're helping to re-green urban spaces to help battle our intense heat.
One of the things we know from the climate impact study that the city did last year and released is that we're going to go from about 10 days a year that have feels like temperature of 105 to more than 70 days by mid-century. So what we're going to need to do is use as many surfaces as we can to absorb those extra floodwaters, to cool down the city.
Gonzalez's team has identified multiple areas across Houston that are demonstrably hotter than others based on their landscape, or, in the case of one neighborhood, lack of landscape.
What we found is Gulfton had the highest temperature by far of any neighborhood. It was 17 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the coolest neighborhood that we measured during the heat campaign. So what that means is that pavements in that neighborhood are plus 120 degrees hot at a place where people are walking back and forth with families. So it really is not just uncomfortable, but it's dangerous for people. And part of the reason is that they have fewer trees. And so what we find is a lot of times the hotter places, the places that are the most climate vulnerable, are also those neighborhoods that suffer from other forms of disinvestment.
It's not just neighborhoods trying to find a way to cool, but one of the unofficial skylines of Houston, the Texas Medical Center, is also bringing back Texas prairies to the people.
One of the really great things about plants is they're constantly moving water through their bodies. And when they do that, in order to evaporate the water out of their bodies, they have to take heat from the air. And so what they do is they cool everything around them. It's almost like having thousands of little air conditioners out here cooling this spot and the surrounding city. If we create a garden city, it's going to be a better place to live, it's going to be a more sustainable place to live, and people are going to still be attracted here.
The city is making progress here with projects like the Yolanda Black Navarro Buffalo Bend Nature Park near the Ship Channel. This former construction fill site is now full of tall, cooling grasses and ponds that offer a refuge for our coastal wildlife. Ed Pettit is a graduate researcher with Texas Southern University, specializing in environmental and climate justice. He's part of a project that studies the impacts of urban heat on the health and well-being of Houston.
Heat is actually the #1 weather-related killer in the U.S. More than hurricanes, more than tornadoes, more than flooding. And we need to find ways to cool down our cities because it especially impacts lower-income neighborhoods, communities of color, formerly redline neighborhoods, and it impacts the elderly and children, the people most at risk of heat stroke. And so we need to find ways to keep our communities cooler.
As you might expect, regreening a city with a concrete maze in downtown takes many teams ready to tackle not just new construction, but old ideas about green buildings.
I ask for developers and home builders and residents is to plant a few more trees than code minimum. It's going to do nothing but help.
Part of helping businesses break through the old way of thinking is by educating about how using Texas natural grasses can actually keep their cooling costs down. I interviewed Steve Stelzer on a green roof at the City of Houston's Green Building Resource Center.
So you've got this 1-2 wonderful combo with helping with the urban heat island and keeping the temperatures low, and you're keeping your roof surface much longer lived.
So like a roof natural sunscreen almost.
It is. Completely, it's like wearing a hat.
Look for projects like Greener Gulfton in the near future. It will add trees and nature-rich spaces to help cool down Houston's hottest neighborhoods.
The only way that this is going to work is that communities are up-powered to help put in all of these natural features like prairies and trees and wetlands to help do all of this great work for us. It's got to be sustainable. The kids have to learn about it, and that way it is going to be a real win for everybody.
Curious.
Buildings, roads.
All right. So as you can see, we got challenges, but fortunately we have some solutions, right? We can use this native ecology to cool the city, to absorb more water, to do the things that we need to do while at the same time uplifting biodiversity. And one other thing that it's going to do is it's going to reconnect us to culture and history. So this is called placemaking, and placemaking is, as you know, it's one of the most important ideas and functions of it in planting with indigenous plants or native plants. It's creating a sense that you live in an actual place that doesn't look like every other place, and that it is specific, right? And so when I plant prairies around town, it keeps us kind of rooted in some of our Western roots. Agricultural stuff keeps us kind of rooted in local agriculture. So, and then the last thing, and this is a couple of pieces of research, is the more we learn about what nature does, the more rich it becomes. So there's a couple of research projects that just came out. These definitely have a nexus with native plants. What they looked at is they looked at loneliness, which is a huge problem after the pandemic, but it was already a problem before the pandemic. And loneliness, it sounds important, but it's actually a lot more important than a lot of people think. it is a precursor to many of the worst chronic diseases that we suffer. People feel lonely. It decreases their survivability, makes them more susceptible to cardiac disease and all sorts of disease. So having a lonely population is not good for public health. So the researchers looked at, if they gave people more exposure to nature, would that have an impact on loneliness? And they found that it dropped by a significant amount. Then they looked at civic spaces, people where they gather, and they said, if people get more civic space, what will that mean for loneliness? Obviously that dropped too, because they were able to mix with people. But when you took nature and civic space and you stuck them together, that's where the loneliness quotient dropped the most, about 39%. So we need native plants for our mental well-being. And there's more studies that are coming out now all the time about what nature means. This is one of my very favorites. They looked at what are the sounds that reduce stress of modern day life, including the pandemic and other things. And bird songs had a very strong correlation to the reduction of stress. Well, I don't think I need to tell you that without native plants and out indigenous plants, there are no birds to sing. So in neighborhoods like the one I'm working in Gulfton, where you don't have as rich a vegetation community, you don't hear as many bird sounds. And so if people are undergoing loneliness, they're undergoing stress, they don't have that reservoir. So nature doesn't solve everything, but it is super, super important. So let me just show you a few things that that we're working on as an idea of what can be done. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to co-create climate-ready, nature-rich neighborhoods. And so I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. So one, and I was just there yesterday, this is like one of my very favorite projects of all time, is Steve Stelzer said, go beyond code minimum. So do more than you actually legally have to. And this project out in A-Leaf is an example of just that. And I think it's what all school campuses should look like. I've helped to put in over 30 school gardens over my career. But the problem with school gardens is that teachers move on very quickly. And when they leave, Lan Shen's on the line, so she knows this. When they leave, it kind of falls apart oftentimes. Also, the teacher has to maintain the whole thing. It's very labor intensive. They have to pay for the thing. It's very time consuming for them. So, and it also, what it does, it creates typically smaller gardens. That's not a problem because the kids can use that, the wildlife can use it. That's great. And NIPSOT has been a leader in funding and getting plant material. So don't stop doing that. But in the future, what if we could make campuses that looked more like this? This is the new Jefferson Early Learning Center that I've been working with a group called PBK, which are the biggest architecture firm in Texas and California. So instead of that code minimum, like 30 trees on campus, we have about 200 trees that are going to be there ultimately. We also are putting in 4.5 acres of prairie wetlands on this campus. It's going to be like a little mini national park where the preschoolers who go here, over 500 preschoolers are going to be here. So instead of building at one giant hole that they can't access and throwing all the water in there, smartly, what has happened here is we distributed the water throughout the site. We're going to be planting this with hundreds of sprigs of wetland plants and native grasses coming up in early October. And if you want to volunteer, we're going to go cut some grasses in mid-September at the MD Anderson Prairie, and then we're going to plant it in October here. This is what I call a wildly healthy, climate-ready site looks like. It looks radically different than what we've done in the past because we have a radically different world that we need to live in at this point. So the kids that are here, and they just started this week, just the cutest preschoolers you've ever seen, are going to have access, equitable access to nature in a way that they wouldn't otherwise, because most of these kids live in apartment complexes and probably can't afford to go out to the places we can. On the ground, this is what this looks like right here. So if you look, this is what it looks like in the ground, and it's just getting going. It's just growing in. It's been very, very harsh conditions with the dryness, with the lack of rain, the heat. So things are just starting to come on, but you can see the scale of this. This isn't a small pocket garden. This is the re-envisioning the whole landscape of a preschool as resilience infrastructure, as biodiversity, as a giant bird feeder. We've already started to see ducks and hawks and dragonflies, and this isn't even getting going yet. But if we can think about school funding and school bond funding to say, when you plan a school, plan for this, pay for this, and have the operations and maintenance team handling this so the teachers can do what they need to do, which is teach and not worry about this maintenance all the time. So flipping the script on that. Another thing that we're doing is we're working on a wonderful project that I love called Greener Gulfton. The Gulfton neighborhood, as you saw in that clip, is the hottest neighborhood. It was 17 degrees hotter than the coolest neighborhood we measured when we did that big heat campaign back in 2020. And part of it is because it's missing nature. It's not that the people don't care about nature. They love nature. They told us over and over again the last year that they love nature. They have lots of cultural connections to it. But this is the one park they have for the 45,000 people. And the tree canopy cover is probably the lowest in the city. And it's got some of the lowest biodiversity in the city. So what we need to recognize is that all communities, including Gulfton, have beautiful people with many strengths, many, lots of leaders, people who want to see good things happen, but sometimes it takes people getting together to formulate an idea of what can happen. And that's what we've done during Greener Gulfton is we've gotten, we took a look at the neighborhood, both from the community aspect and also from a scientific perspective. So we took lots of measurements. We did a vegetational analysis, a heat analysis, flood analysis. We looked at where people worked and they walked and they did all that stuff. And we combined all these layers and we combined it with community input. And now we're about to release next month this plan where we're going to say, this is where indigenous plants, this is where nature can be best situated to help this community be healthier, to help biodiversity, living community. So all the interventions that which are mentioning are One Health interventions. They're meant to uplift both the humans and the biodiversity all together. So one of the things is create cool corridors. So we need to plant out corridors with either trees or trellising systems using native vines to cool this very hot community. Another thing is in one part of the neighborhood, principally down here, has street level flooding. So we need to work with the city and the county and other people to create stormwater wetlands using native plants to soak up and clean that water and to reduce the amount of street level flooding. We need to do things like create a forestry plan, like a neighborhood forestry plan that incorporates job creation into it. So there's a lot of ways that we can work to create better situations. One thing we're looking at are bus stops. This is my friend Antonio. You can see this bus stop here. And a lot of the bus stops in many parts of the city are just like this. They're just a pole and a stop sign and blazing heat, basically. Well, what if we green these stops? And we're working with a coalition around something called rest stops. We're looking at how can we green these bus stops for both the people and the biodiversity. And fortunately, as you know, there's always a rock star plant or two. Here's one. It's a native morning glory called tie vine. It grows everywhere in Gulfton. It doesn't matter what the conditions are. It's super hardy. So the neighborhood is actually telling us what can grow there. And we got to just listen to what it's saying. So if we have trellising systems in this neighborhood and we cover them with quick growing vines like passion flower, like tie vine, like scarlet creeper, what we're going to have is we're going to have a tremendous amount of beauty, a tremendous amount of food resources for pollinators, and we're going to cool and beautify the neighborhood for the people. Here's another one that you guys know well. Hackberry. There are probably thousands of volunteer hackberries in and around Gulfton. This is a species that is wanting to grow there. So let's not call it a trash tree. This is one of the most high-powered plants for wildlife, used by a ton of animals. It grows quickly, it provides shade. No, it's not a redwood, but in conditions like this where people need shade and animals need food and shelter, this is a good choice, right? So creating green neighborhoods is critical. connecting those neighborhoods is just as critical. So we're working on a couple of projects for you guys who are in Memorial Park right now at the Houston Arboretum. We're very active in working with these amazing partners at Memorial Park Conservancy. They're doing an amazing job of building this world-class, biggest in Texas land bridge. So my team, Aaron Shummelin and his team have harvested over 2,000 pounds of native seeds from our local preserves to restore about 50 acres of prairie here and here. I'm working on the interpretive program to sell the prairies because you got to tell the story. So this is connectivity, and this is connectivity. As you know, many of you know, there are folks like Don Verser and Sarah Flournoy and myself and other people that are trying to get some momentum around having these wild prairie corridors that are restored or old growth. This is an old growth prairie that is close to the Astrodome. So the rock stars there can be things like these native tall grasses like Indian grass and little bluestem. My colleague, Carolyn White from Harris County Public Health, and I went out and measured temperatures on these corridors last year. And the temperatures of the tallest prairies on these corridors were about 88 degrees on that day. The turf was 98. So we're talking about a 10-degree difference. So not only are we providing lots of wildlife habitat, we're cooling the city, we're creating that connectivity to culture. So these native plants have a big role to play. So if we can create climate-ready, naturally healthy places like Gulfton, connect them back into this corridor system, it's going to be great. Lastly, bringing it close to home. We always want at TNC to get people involved with the science. You know, we do a lot of science. We have over 600 scientists throughout the world. And so we do things like the heat mapping. This is Antonio. He's looking at heat with this heat camera. So we did that huge heat mapping campaign with the city, the county, HARC, and NOAA and National Wildlife Service. We had 40 or 80 different community scientists do that. We participate every year and help to co-lead the Houston City Nature Challenge team, the Houston Galveston City Nature Challenge team. We want people to collect this biodiversity data. What's cool about iNaturalist now is now as ecologists, we can use this crowdsourced biodiversity data to make decisions about what to do. So I've done about 1,000 observations in Gulfton. So now we know kind of what's there, and now we can make decisions as to what to plant, right? And there are over 500,000 observations in Harris County alone. So it's really kind of an amazing thing when you unleash the power of the community. Job of this at Wildscapes Workshop and with your landscaping classes, you can take personal action as well. So it's at the big scale, it's improving policy and getting all that funding that's coming in. At the neighborhood level, it's greening the neighborhood using indigenous species and then connecting them with corridors. And at home, it looks something like this. So here's a typical lawn in my neighborhood. And you can see through the thermal camera, it's pretty darn hot, right? This is pretty, there's not a lot of stuff here. You can see where the plants are growing. It's much cooler, right? There's some shading coming off of this building, but the yard itself is pretty hot. Here's one of my very favorite houses in the whole city. And probably somebody knows who this is. It might even be one of your yards. This is over there by Mark Twain Elementary. If somebody knows who owns this, very, very much kudos. So this is a climate ready yard and a climate friendly yard. It's climate ready because all those plants can absorb water and cool the city, but it's also climate friendly in that you're not emitting carbon dioxide into the air constantly by mowing. And if you look at the heat signature, you can really see that it is demonstrably cool in pockets. And if you look at the temperatures on the street right next to this yard is 113.3, 115.3. The yard itself was 93.9. So you're talking about a over 20-degree difference. In some places in the city, I've measured a temperature difference between hard, hot surfaces and prairies or other like trees or other natural features, 40-degree difference, right? And we have to also remember that trees soak up so much water that they can be a flood solution to a certain degree. They can't solve flooding, but they can reduce the amount of rainwaters that get into us. Lastly, you can do even things like this. Here's a rock star. I just saw this at my son's school this afternoon. This is, as you know, many of you know, frog fruit. This is total volunteer. Like, they didn't plant this, but it has taken over the lawn here. And I counted at least 8 different species of pollinators on it. It was super easy to walk on. So replacing your lawn with something like frog fruit, if you can do that, great way to both reduce emissions, attract pollinators, make the people happy because they're getting in contact with biodiversity. So there are so many ways in which indigenous plants will help to determine how sustainable, how livable this place is. And this is our moment. This is our moment. This is the moment that you guys have all been working for decades in many cases, because we are going to see this huge influx of money into the system to get millions of plants grown. So the city has a goal of 4.6 million trees in the next 10 years and 100 green stormwater, or basically engineered wetlands in the city. Let's meet that goal. Let's get there. And to get there, what's going to happen is there are going to be a lot of new people, architects and city planners and health people and people you have never seen, people I have never seen come into the system. Well, that's where the Native Plant Society and groups like the Native Plant Society are going to be the secret sauce, because it's the knowledge that you guys have accumulated, have cultivated, and have disseminated that's going to be the touchstone for what all these people who are coming in the system and want to learn but don't know yet. That's where the secret sauce is, right? So you guys are going to be the experts that help us all get to better decisions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop. I'm not going to stop sharing, but I would love to answer any questions that you guys might have. And I'm just going to leave the board up just in case I need it.
Well, I have a comment. Since you're talking to Steve Stelzer a lot, a couple of years ago, I suggested, why can't they have like posters and signs at the permitting center that said, things like do this, not that, and like a picture of that school with all those separate wetland areas rather than one square or retention pond in the back of the property and things like that. And he said they weren't allowed to do it then.
I think they need help with that. I think we could help them with that.
Yeah, well,
I don't think they know.
Well, Jaime has the graphics here for there's at least a few samples, but there are others. Green Star Wetlands has done several projects, and the city's supposedly more on board now. So hopefully whatever reason that he said they weren't allowed to do that at the permitting center before, maybe that has changed or could change.
Yeah, I think we just, I think Linda's right. I think this may just be a conversation that we say, hey, we have try this, not this kind of thing, or try a substitution. I think he'd probably be open to that. But in that same vein, because you guys are the kind of the subject matter experts, I think that guidance would be very welcome. And I can't speak for Steve, he's his own guy, but it seems like this is the moment to kind of bring that stuff back up.
Yeah. So I'm wondering about the citizen scientists in those heat cameras, because I looked at one of those and it was a little more money than I thought I could spend. But I was wondering if you provide them.
Well, let me just show you just real quickly. The way that the heat mapping campaign, can you guys see this heat map campaign here?
Yeah.
The way that the heat mapping worked is we had 2 different things. We had what are called FLIR cameras, which hook up to your iPhone.
Yeah.
And this is how we took these pictures. This is MD Anderson Prairie. You can see like the cold, dark prairie in the middle of the trees. And then even like I said, the lawns are quite a bit hotter than just the actual prairie. So it's that transpiration action. It's the structure that is very, very important, as well as the plant material itself. But what we did is we got equipment from NOAA, and these are special heat or thermometers. Basically, they're sensors that have thermometers and humidity sensors.
Yeah.
And they clip onto your car window, just like this. And we had 32 routes that were chosen. Each route was about covered about 10 square miles, and we did 32 blocks of that. The largest heat mapping campaign before that was 10. We did 32. And so we kind of blew it out of the water, and we were thinking about doing maybe one next year or the year after to update that and to fill in holes where we didn't get it. But these were all provided for free. And we used them for a day, and we basically had 3 runs to the day: a morning, an afternoon, and an evening. And then we took all the route data. There's a monitor right there. We took all the route data, and this is what the route data looks like. So these are individual routes that people ran. These are the empirical measurements of what happened, right? This is the actual measurements of what they did. And by that, there's a group called Kappa Strategies that was able to extrapolate a heat signature for these blocks, right? Now, what I will say is if you want just a good temperature, like just a reading of temperature, there are handheld guns like the one that I had in the picture, and those are about $25. So you can measure surface temperatures very easily. So if you wanted to measure this versus this versus this, I'm using those a lot now just to give my pictures some weight in terms of like how much temperature, because the FLIR camera pictures are relative temperature, really. It's really good for that. It's not as accurate for like absolute temperature. So I use them together now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody's monitoring the chat. Are there questions in the chat?
Not so much. There's lots of comments. Yeah.
Yeah, here's a good one. How do we get our HOAs to agree to letting us remove grass and grow natives? Well, you know, I think you guys have done a good job of this, but there is a state ordinance or law. A lawyer could tell me what it is. I have to look it up again, but it does give protection, limited protection. It's a statute that gives limited protection for the use of xeric, xeriscaping plants. So if you can show that you have a plant that is helping to conserve water at a time where the state is losing water, that gives you some protection from HOAs. And then there's just all the practical things that go into this that Lauren Jansen Simpson and I and other people tell you about, which is you have to have intentionality. You have to tell your neighbors about it. So if you can get people to kind of be more comfortable with it, but there's also that legal protection to a certain degree. There's no super easy answers. You have to run it down the field. One other thing I will say is that, and I got this advice a while back, is that many covenants say that you can't grow weeds. But the fact is there's no real definition of a weed oftentimes. Yeah. So what some people have been successful in doing is going back to their HOA and saying, you need to define what a weed is. What is the legal definition of a weed? And they go, wow, well, weed is, you see it, and and like, no, give me, since you're asking me to do something legal, I need you to define a weed for me. And sometimes they just stop asking. So also try that. All right, Robin Yates, do you have a question?
Yes, Jaime, can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this presentation, dude. You are right on spot. I appreciate it. I had a question, how we can join you for your harvesting the MD Anderson Prairie in September and that greening project. How can we get connected with what you're doing?
Oh, love to have you. I will go ahead and probably early next week, I'll go ahead and send whoever is pushing information out to NIPSOT people or people who go to the presentations. I'm going to send a volunteer card, and then you'll just sign up straight with me. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to cut several hundred sprigs of Indian grass, switchgrass, and eastern gamma grass. Eastern gamma grass is very easy to break apart or sprig, and I'm going to try to take 300 sprigs to this Jefferson Early Learning Center. So We would love to have you come out and help us kind of sprig that out. And then once the dates for the October work party to put these things in is there, we'll let you know too. And we'll also let you know about Buffalo Bayou Park and where they're going to put their stuff in as well. I'd love to have you guys.
Awesome. Thank you. The frog fruit is a great idea. I have it. I'm propagating it, and it's all of my lawn now. And so thank you for mentioning that. Perfect.
That's awesome. Yeah, your whole yard is a bee feeder. That's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah,
I have a question. It's Susie.
go ahead.
I put this in the chat, but apparently it doesn't, it isn't being read. So I'm going to give a presentation next week to the Neartown Association. So, I mean, what I'm asking you is what would be your sales points in a 30-minute presentation to the Neartown Association? Because this is Montrose, it's not a restrictive HOA, but what would be, I can put on my video, what would be your suggestion then as to how to get them interested and get them involved?
Yeah, I was just having this conversation with some folks today, and it takes a little bit of research sometimes. And unfortunately, like sometimes when you come in and you do a presentation, you don't really know. But, you know, my belief is that everybody loves nature, but you don't always know how to unlock that value set in that person. And so that's where the questioning and answering, because people may value it for aesthetics, people may value it for cultural, for scientific. I mean, every single value you can think about. And so if there's a way, as you talk to them, to kind of sense like, what is it that they're really looking for? Are they looking to build a sense of place? Are they looking for more aesthetic beauty? Are they looking for more wildlife? Do they really care about climate change? For some of my volunteers now, they really want to do something about climate change. That's their motivating factor. They have their parents like I am, of small kids. They just want to get busy. They know that they're not going to solve all the world's problems by planting a bunch of trees and doing all this stuff, but they're trying to do something. So there's always something for people to kind of connect in with. One thing that I always do is if I'm going to go, and if I have enough time, I'm going to do a little research about that neighborhood just to find out what are the biological roots, the bones of the place, so that as I talk to people, I can relay some of that story. You know, like A-Leaf, for instance. You know, I'm talking to some of the new teachers, and I'm going to be preparing some materials, but I'm talking also to the grounds crew. Like, do you know what this place used to be? Right? It was prairie, and it was a dairy farm, and this, and same thing in Gulfton. As we've been doing all this community planning, we took it all the way to 10,000 years ago. And then we moved it all the way up to where Gulfton was an equestrian center and a place of oil and gas exploration. It was a cattle ranch and all this stuff. So sometimes one thing that I think that really connects people is I always tell people, like, I'm not trying to bring you something new and weird. I'm trying to bring you something old and meaningful. And for some people, that's a real thing. For some other people, it could be that call to Texan identity. Like, this is what made the cowboys and da-da-da. For some people, it might be something completely different. So I think as you prepare your talk, my suggestion would be to leave some room in the front to assess who you're teaching. So you can get some instant feedback about, one thing that you could do, a simple thing is you could say, like, why do you love nature? What kinds of nature do you love? That way you're kind of just asking them and you're probing them for information. You're mining them for information that then you can reflect back as you talk, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the bird angle is a good one. You like birds.
Yeah, people like
They need
birds.
native plants and money saving. That's a
Mhm.
good one. Yeah. So,
And noise.
yes,
You
noise.
know, like,
You hate
like
those leaf
noise
blowers?
reduction. Yeah, the leaf blowers and the mowers and all that stuff. I know somebody's got to do that work, but it is like an irritant, especially as people have worked with from home at the pandemic. It's like all the time. Like, let's have a quieter, let's have a noisier, natural neighborhood, not a noisy mechanical neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I'm
So,
just scanning the chat here.
well, a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, a couple of years before that, there was a meeting between HJC and someone from the city of Houston, and several of us from the Native Plant Society attended, and from our Audubon. about creating an incentive plan for native landscapes at home, like they have in the Woodlands, like they have in San Antonio. And then we haven't heard anything since. So I was wondering if you've heard anything.
I haven't heard, but boy, this is going to be a good time to start bringing this stuff up because there is going to be more funding coming in. And like I said, it's going to take a while for this funding to get here. So somebody asked, like, how can we become involved in the IRA funding, the Inflation Reduction Act funding? I think that from my perspective, of people that are concerned in this area, I think we just need to, find a time in the next couple of months to have a coffee and say, look, how can we square up our, be ready when people say, like, what needs to happen in this town and where can native plants really play a role? Because what's going to happen, as always, is the federal government is slow to get money out. And then they're going to want to land a huge amount of money all at one time, right? So I think it's incumbent upon the groups that are working in the town, public health officials, everybody to kind of get together to say, we've made these big bets, the city's made these big bets on trees, on stormwater. We want to see things happen. So how would we get there? So for instance, one of my big things is, like, if we're really going to be competing with other communities for all this money, why not work together to create a very big plant materials center where we can grow locally adapted, locally collected seed? It's not to replace the Audubons or the Green Star Wetland Farm or Morning Star. It's just to say, like, we are going to need a scale of plants that is far beyond any of us have ever produced. And so why can't we have a multi-institutional nursery that can provide literally millions of plants? That's the kind of scale that we need. And the seeds, right? We need some locally adapted seeds too. So there are places where I think we'll be able to come together. It's going to take a while for this to all shake out.
Also, it's my understanding it's 40% of the electricity used by the city of Houston is to move and treat water. So
wow,
saving water and not being used to water lawns would be a big help on the city's budget.
Someone asked, how engaged is Harris County Parks with this concept? I'm going to need some clarification on which concept. While you're cogitating on that, I will send you guys also in the follow-up email to this talk. There's a real cool corridor project. Somebody mentioned corridors here in Tomball. There is a super cool corridor project happening in Dallas where they are revegetating this big corridor with prairie. So it's also happening in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I think they're doing like 7 miles of prairie corridor. So there are communities that are actually picking this up and running with it. And I believe that once we're able to land some projects, that it will also take off. But it's just bulldogging it literally for years until it happens.
Yeah. Someone pointed out that maintenance crews need training.
That's right.
Yeah.
Big time. That's
They
right.
need to know.
Hey, there are some questions from the crowd.
Okay.
They're in the chat. We have a question about the funding, about how to get funding. And then we also had a request to talk more about the green rest stops.
Green bus stops.
Yeah. Funding, how will money come down from the federal government? Will it be grants? We don't know yet because it just passed and they have to go through rulemaking and they have to go through that process. So I don't expect them to come with money anytime super quickly, which is actually works to our advantage because, like I said, it gives us some time to have the conversations that we need to talk it and dream and envision what we would want. So we don't know yet how any of that's going to work. In terms of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, that will pass through the Texas parks. So if that, like $60 million a year comes through, and they have a formula where they've already kind of looked at like, how would it be spent in the state? Some would stay with parks and wildlife. They'd actually be able to hire more biologists and botanists and all the stuff that they actually need, which would benefit people all across the state. but a lot of it's actually going to pass through to other groups as well if we can get this money. So there's this continuous fund that's funneling in and causing all this catalytic change. So that's going to be super great. In terms of someone mentioning Kelly Andrasic over at the City of Houston Parks Department, she is I want to be Kelly when I grow up. She is a rock star, and she's doing all kinds of things, and she's positioning, I think, the city to be successful in tree planting and revegetating medians and everything. So yes, huge props to Kelly.
You can adopt medians, by the way.
Yeah, we're talking about some medians in Gulfton. We're trying to find it has to be a right size. As far as the rest stops are concerned, we're working with Link Houston. We're working with HARC. We're working with a couple of groups. And basically what needs to happen there is an assessment of the entire metro system. The idea would be to do some GIS, some geographical information system work, so that you identify all the stops, then you take out all the covered stops, then you map it with flooding and heat and social vulnerability. And what you can get to is you can ooch it down. And then, and here's an important thing, and we see this in Gulfton, we see it in Aldine, we see it in other places in the city. There are bus stops without any shade or any nature, but there is a tree maybe 10 to 15 feet away. Now, that's not fair. I'm not saying that's fair, but people sit under that tree or rest under that tree before the bus comes, and they have time to transit. In Gulfton, I actually see families, young families, trying to stand behind utility poles just to get shade, which is just makes me want to cry. But if there's a tree within like 10 feet, that may not be the highest priority stop. So what we would be able to do is get it down to a place where the hottest, nastiest, like concrete pad, just nothing around it. We could identify maybe like the first 50 stops that really need to be revegetated, because they are just they have high ridership, they have no nature, it's hot or floodable. So I think that kind of next level analysis that would be done by HARC would be super powerful. And in addition to that, doing the community engagement that a group like Link Houston can do, and then also making sure that the plant palettes that are used are locally adapted and they're selected as a suite of species that can maximally benefit wildlife, right? So just don't put up a bunch of crepe myrtles to cool things off. Carefully select the species so that you're getting the maximum benefit for biodiversity.
Wow. And vines are faster and cheaper too.
That's right.
Like your morning glory.
That's right. And there are many pathways in Gulfton, but in any community that is just too skinny to plant trees, or they're under power lines. You can't plant trees there either. So devising a trellising system that can go for blocks or a block or two, or in the worst places, and then using those vines that grow super fast, you can probably get shading within, a season or two. Whereas a tree is going to take, depending on the tree, it's going to take a long time to get to that shade.
I would have guessed most bus stops are in the sun. And right in the intersection.
23% of bus stops are covered. But that doesn't mean they're all shadeless. So we'd have to do the analysis to figure that out.
Yeah. You could also consider muscadines, and then some time of the year they provide some food.
That'd be cool. That'd be really cool. A lot of people want local food, and yeah, they could collect them and all that jazz. So that could be great. And also passion flower, right? So if you let those ripen, they can be eaten. So all right, you guys see any other questions?
Well, people are asking about being involved in planning with the IRA funds, but I think we have to talk to bigger entities in the city, in the county.
Yes.
And Nature Conservancy.
I'm just trying to read here. Yeah, I think, unfortunately, in terms of like people are asking about yards and HOAs and things like that, I think it takes us a long time to get socialized. So places like Phoenix, like Las Vegas, like some communities in California, they are really feeling the pinch, as you know, of water restrictions. So they are paying people to convert their lawns, or they're penalizing people if they don't convert their lawns. And I think that we're not there yet because we have enough water. But at some point, the state is going to face really bad water crunches, and then it's going to flip real quick, and people are going to, what are we doing about that, right? So it's coming. So this is why classes like landscape certification, wildscapes workshop, it's so important to keep those things going, because at some point, all these little fires are going to start into a big flame, right? So all the preparatory work that has been happening over the last decades is going to matter, because I think the flip is going to come quickly once we start really feeling some of these things.
Someone asked,
and I'll just, yeah, go ahead.
someone asked what the coolest neighborhood in the survey was, in the heat survey.
It was actually a neighborhood in Northeast Houston, which was kind of weird. You know, the great thing about science is that it tells you what you think you know, and it tells you some things you wouldn't have thought of. So one of the things that we found out was in some of the heat data, there are actually these hot spot buildup places in and around bayous. And we were like, wait a second, those bayous are supposed to be cool. But because air shifts around, sometimes there's kind of a latent heat effect, right? Also, because plants cool the air around them, sometimes if there aren't enough trees, you have to have a certain level of trees in order to cool an area. So for a neighborhood, optimally, you'll have 40% canopy cover or higher for maximum cooling value for the whole neighborhood. But also we have to remember that like one tree shading a house is also important, right? So it wasn't as cut and dry. One thing that we have seen in other cities where those red line maps that I showed you, those disinvested maps that oftentimes African Americans lived in those neighborhoods, in certain cities, you can almost literally lay the heat on top of the red line map and know exactly where it occurred. You actually can lay the heat map down and you can guess that hot spot right there was an African American neighborhood. And when you pull it away, sure enough, that's exactly what it is. We didn't see that same effect here in Houston per se, just a different ecology and the different way that these neighborhoods grew up. Some of these neighborhoods like Gulfton didn't even exist when redlining was existing. So when you do the science, you find some weird stuff. I will point out that if you're looking at this screen, the dividing line between the haves and the have-nots is pretty stark. So you can see that Gulfton, which is right here in the red, and it became super red in the afternoon. If you know the city and you go across to Bel Air or West U, we're talking about over 10 degrees cooler, right? Because it's leafy, they're green, they have a canopy advantage. So like it's a tale of two cities, like here, cooler and then blazing hot, right? So that's another thing as we think about like, if we're going to plant 4.6 million trees, planting them wherever is probably not going to get us to the best place. Really using data like this and getting even better granular data to say, okay, here's a really hot spot, let's plant some trees here. Here's another really hot spot, so that we prioritize where they go. And the city is working on trying to understand, and HARC is trying to understand, like if we're going to do a tree equity map for heat, what would that look like? So that's going to come down the pike a little bit once they finalize that research.
Seeing if there's any more. Do you happen to know, because I need to know this, are morning glories, I can't think of the word now, host plant for anything?
That's a good question. I'd throw it back to the audience. I know that, hummingbirds use morning glories for sure, but I don't know if they're a caterpillar food. I'm trying to think. I don't know is the answer. Could be something eats them. I wouldn't doubt it.
One of the Hill Country chapters has picked morning glory for one of their native landscaping classes. And I have to make all new slides for them because they picked strange plants.
Well, yeah. I'll tell you one surprising plant, indigenous plant, is sorrel vine. And I don't know too much about sorrel vine. Maybe somebody in this call does, but I've been looking out in the urban zone for what is the toughest of the tough. The plants that volunteer on their own, they're growing in the cracks of freeways, they're growing on really hot near sidewalks. Because I'm trying to develop a sense of like, what is going to make it no matter what? Like that green roof that Steve Stelzer was on, that irrigation was broken for years. So many of the plants that were there originally, they went away. So I was like, great, natural experiment. What's going to survive? Not root bristlegrass, did not blink an eyelash for being on a super hot roof without irrigation. So it tells me like if we do these green bus stops and they're covered bus stops, or if we have really harsh conditions, that might be a good candidate. So keep your eyes out for the super, super tough. I know that Doris Hurd and Garden Club of Houston produced that Texas Tough Trees, which is a really great resource, but be on the lookout. Nature is telling us what can grow.
Yeah. And often what the soil needs.
Yep, yep, that's right.
I don't know, there's lots and lots of comments. I might be missing some questions in here, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll send a follow-up email. You can go crazy and do this with your yard. This is what I do every year. Just plant the whole thing in spring wildflowers and grasses. But what I would say is to my earlier point, if you're going to be doing this stuff, you know, I talk to my neighbors about what I'm going to do. I don't just go out in there and do that. But it is amazing how many children will come to the yard to look at bees and butterflies because every other yard is just mowed and there's nothing of interest for them there, just boring and still. So they come to our yard and they're like just staring at it or drawing pictures of it or whatever.
So Jaime spoke to us about this at our Wildscapes a few years back, and we do have a great video, YouTube video. I share it all the time about this project.
And I have a sign so I can tell people what the heck's going on.
Yeah.
And it has a name, and it has a name, which is very important.
And speaking
All right,
well, speaking of maintenance crews, that's why, you know, edging, it can be the solution.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Katie was going to talk about the field trip.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to remind everybody that Saturday, September 10th, we are going to have a field trip at Brazos Bend State Park. And based on today's rain, and it looks like good, possibly rain next week, I'm getting more optimistic that everything won't be brown and there will be water. So that'll be good. We're going to meet at 9:30 at the 40-acre lake, and we'll get organized, get paper signed, and start out at 9:45. And I just would suggest that anybody who is interested in coming, if you think you're going to come, email me and I will send you my phone number so that if you have a problem, if you get lost, if you end up late, you can call me. And please call me. Don't text, because I don't have a dinger on my text and I won't get the text until after the field trip is over. And do please be sure and read what we suggest you bring, especially like a hat and plenty of water and snacks. And I think that I'm pretty sure that the visitor center, where you pay, and you do have to pay, there is an entrance fee per person, it's $7. And there is a visitor center there that should have water. I don't know about snacks, so, and I'll have some extras. So, but you know, try and remember to bring plenty of water and something to eat. And I think I think those are the main points.
Yep. Yep. Info is in
I
the
know.
newsletter.
I'm sorry. I thought of one more thing. I will confirm, it will be confirmed on the website, on the field, in the field trip area on Thursday, September 8th, if it is a go. You know, if it suddenly gets real hot, we won't go, because it's not worth it if it's 100 degrees. So please also check the website on Thursday the 8th for a yes or a no, go or not. That's it.
Awesome. Be sure also to check the newsletter and check online our website for information about Wildscapes. Tickets are available now. It's in person this year, so capacity will be limited. So get your tickets I don't know if Katie, you want to tell people about the speakers?
We've got a really interesting and diverse group of speakers. Dan Worrell, who has written now another book. He's going to speak. He spoke once before, and we got all sorts of positive reviews on him. Anita Schiller, who's been studying, she works for the Harris County Precinct 4, and she's been studying mosquitoes and all sorts of things about the different kinds, how to stop them without, huge pesticide things. And she's going to be speaking, and I think that's going to be really interesting. And Mary Pearl Muth is going to be speaking about, small wildscapes. And then Diana Foss, who is, one of our most entertaining speakers, whatever she's talking about, is going to be talking about the plant sale, the plants in the plant sale. So it looks like a really good lineup.
All right. Well.
And Jaime will be our master of ceremonies.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, Jaime. There's lots of thank yous in the comments in the chat.
Yeah, thank you all. And I'm looking forward to the Wildscapes workshop. I need to load up on some plants myself.
Yeah, great. Okay. Anything else? Any other announcements?
Oh, I'll just say that the plant of the month this year, for the first time in a long time if ever, we do expect to have the Eupatorium, the late flowering bone set, for sale at Wildscapes. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
And the Wildscapes registration link is in the chat right now.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Courtesy of Mark Crowd, our wonderful Wildscapes committee chair.
Okay. And in the newsletter, and on our website, and on Facebook. You can't miss it.
Hi, we just got a question from the crowd, and they were asking about the Alpine, Texas, the state symposium, if there's any updates on that.
Yes, well, the symposium, the dates are set, and speakers are found, and I'm afraid I don't have the details. I'd have to go to the website too. But if you go to npsot.org, you can get the details about the Alpine Symposium. And September 22nd through the, I don't know why I can't memorize it. Well, it's through the weekend. It's from Thursday through Sunday. There's lots of field trips. Lots of field trips. Oh,
it'll be online also. So,
yeah.
Let people know they can join online also.
Yeah.
And if you want to go, you got to sign up soon because everything fills up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll be great no matter what.
Yeah, there are tickets for attending via Zoom and tickets for attending in person. And if you go in person, there's a lot of field trips and activities planned.
Yeah, and we're going on a star party. And if you want to do that, my sister's, gonna grab me and take me there. And we're gonna go to a star party. So if you go like now, before everything fills up, you can do a lot of fun things in that area. It's always great to go there anyway.
Yeah. It's be after the monsoon, so it should be very green.
Yeah.
The dates are September 22nd to 25th.
Yeah.
And the link is in the chat.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's also every year somebody makes a quilt. I believe it's Bill Hopkins' wife. And it's raffled. And I will have a graphic next time that has a picture of the quilt. It's made out of vintage style fabrics, reproduction fabrics, and Texas maps. And we'll sell raffle tickets at Wildscapes. It's a statewide raffle, but you're not allowed to have statewide raffles. So we're locally raffling this item. So. Oh, good. Oh, good. And also other people are contributing to state information. There are photo contests and video contests and newsletter contests. there's a deadline to enter of August 31st, so you can enter in that. And also at the symposium, awards and various other recognitions, including our scholarships, are awarded. So. Okay. If there's nothing else, I think we'll say good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Bye. Thanks.